Recently, a study out of the University of Michigan suggested that home gardens have six-fold the increase in the carbon footprint of traditional agriculture. Well, I guess that was a waste. The reality is that of course, news outlets across the world picked up that headline and ran with it. But here's the challenge of research: you have to read beyond the headline. It's super important when you see an outlandish headline that you do your own research, and that means going to the source. So in this case, I went to one of the authors' pages and I was able to download the actual article. So let's talk about what the article really says. Well, first of all, modern agriculture has allowed us to have fruits and vegetables shipped at our convenience from all over the world. That is a huge carbon footprint. The distance from your door to your garden is probably a matter of a few feet, but the reality is that footprint is significantly less footprint than getting your produce from a farm onto a plane into your grocery or your local food outlet. And then you have to go get it, whether it's bus or whether you take a car there. There's a footprint for that too. The second thing that they said is that in many cases, urban gardens, home gardens, were using raised beds, and therefore that creates a lot of carbon. Well, maybe that's the case, that we have raised gardens in our garden. I certainly have several. For demonstration purposes, I wanted to see how much easier it was to be in a raised garden versus a garden on the ground. The reality is it's not really that much easier at all. In fact, it takes time to set it up and so forth. So I think that if you're into raised gardening because you have limited amount of space, or maybe because you have issues with getting down low on the ground to garden, I think it's really acceptable to have a raised garden. But what they were saying is that many of the gardens they discovered were ordering kits or raised bed or some type of element to be able to grow up. The point being is you don't have to invest in those fancy things. Certainly you can, and I do. But what you could do instead is recycle things that are already on your property and maybe use some leftover brick or stone, or maybe you could use other things to create the borders that you're looking for, the edges of your beds, to distinguish that that's a bed and maybe to keep the weeds out. The other thing that was brought up is the nutrition in the actual fruit and vegetable. As soon as you pick up a strawberry out of your own garden and bring it in your house, it's losing nutritional value. So if you are a home gardener or an urban gardener, you want to pick and eat the produce as quickly as possible so you get as many benefits from the water, the minerals, and the vitamins that are in that food. But you lose some of that as it's trucked across the country. One of the things I've discovered in my own health is that when I used to live in a big urban city and most of my produce was coming off those airplanes and from a long way away, I had a lot of issues related to my health. Specifically, I chronically had sinus infections. One of the interesting things that's happened to me since I moved to central Pennsylvania is sinus infections are really few and far between. In fact, in the last 8 years I've lived here, I've had one. The bottom line is that by eating local produce, which I'm super lucky to be surrounded by farms and I grow my own produce, you're eating your own pollen, so you're inoculating yourself. The other thing I do is I eat local honey every day. When I travel to a new place, I always buy the local honey. When I'm at home, I get honey from the closest bee hive I possibly can, which happens to be in my neighborhood. I have 2 neighbors that actually have beehives. The point being is that by eating your local honey, you're a lot less likely to have issues related to allergies, and that has been my experience. So I encourage you to give it a try in your own home and see what you have. Here's some tea with honey right here. The other thing that is really not brought up in this article, which I think is incredibly important to mention, is there is a social and nutritional benefit to urban agriculture. The bottom line is that agriculture that is shared invites a social environment. Whether you're growing things and creating recipes together, or you're trading seeds or plants, there is a community that grows around that. And I got to see that just a couple of years ago in Philadelphia, right on the banks of John Bartram, our father of modern agriculture's garden, is a very large community garden. What I will tell you is that community garden is located in an area of Philadelphia that really isn't the best neighborhood potentially you could ever go to. There are a lot of projects in that area, but there has been an incredible community that has been created because of that garden. And I found that being there was not in any way threatening, because people were happy to invite you into this space. There were all kinds of, even adults learning how to ride bikes, people walking their kids and their dogs, and people enjoying being in the garden. Gardens create community, and that doesn't happen when your agriculture is trucked from thousands of miles away. The reality is that we need to preserve our local food for several reasons. One, it's very likely that you will get very little variety in a grocery store unless they're buying from local farmers, as some of our grocery stores do. Ideally, grow it yourself so that you can actually control how the environment is being manipulated to grow those things. If you're into sustainable agriculture, as I am, and planting native plants so you can control your bug problem and invite pollinators in, I encourage you to buy as much local produce as you possibly can. Keep your farmers in business, but in addition, grow what you can yourself. That way you know what is on your food. It's just come out from a report from Moms Across America that many of the food that we consider healthy fast food is contaminated with high levels of glyphosate. That's Roundup, boys and girls. It's not good for you. I want you to be very cautious about buying your produce. When you can, buy organic. It's important because it's important for your health, your children, and for the future of these farmers who are going above and beyond to get their produce certified that it isn't contaminated. Isn't that interesting? You see, organic farmers have to prove that their food is pure, where our traditional farmers do not. This article doesn't address that whatsoever, that there is a benefit to not eating chemical-laced food. So I think when we read headlines and maybe that headline shocks you, take a moment, pause, go pour yourself a cup of coffee, and let's really dig down on what the article does say, which is it's better for you to buy local, it's better for you to consume things than that have been trucked across the world for you to eat, and it's also great for your community to be a part of a community garden. Garden thoughtfully and take care.